It seems these days that everyone's asking what AI can do. But we're thinking the better question might be, what will you do now that it can maybe do your job, your homework, and maybe even your thinking? Because this isn't just some far off future. Really, this month, OpenAI released ChatGPT 5, and Google's Gemini is rolling out its biggest education updates to date. And here are some of the things that these tools can already do. Study mode, being able to break down complex topics, quiz you, reteach you in real time. Deep research, being able to pull live information from across the web and summarize it instantly and creating executive reports for you without you having to open a single tab to search. These days, AI tools are embedded directly into your browser. So you can do storybooks with Gemini, which we're going to talk about later because that's a really cool one. Like literally being able to upload your own photos and having Gemini create personalized storybooks for you with illustrations all in minutes and ready for not just bedtime, but really anytime. And then obviously file, being able to upload things. But the point of all of this is these days, AI tools can do so much more than simply respond to a text message that you put in. And these are just the things we've seen recently. These tools are getting smarter, faster, and more embedded into everything we do. But the thing that's not really changing fast enough is our mindset towards what we can do. Every single one of these updates brings us back to the same questions, and it's these three questions that we're going to focus on for today's episode. What kind of teammate do we really want AI to be? What kind of work actually matters now? And what kinds of systems, assignments, grading, training, leadership are we still protecting just because they're familiar that might need to be redesigned? So today, let's talk about what these updates really mean, not as features, but as signals for what we need to think about that comes next.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin? And how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Sabba Quidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools.
In every room we've been in lately, schools, boardrooms, leadership retreats, we're seeing the same split. Most people are just really asking small questions. Will this replace me? Should we block it? Can students still write essays? Are they going to still be thinking? And then there's a different group, the ones that are asking bigger, more uncomfortable questions to which there's not really any answer. What kind of teammate do we want AI to be? What kind of work really matters now? What kind of human systems are worth saving? And which ones are just habits we're afraid to let go of? So with that, Stefan, tell us about ChatGPT 5 and why some people love it and why some people hate it.
I think with the hate, it's easier. I think there's two drivers of the hate. The one is that people had a little bit of unrealistic expectations. Some people thought ChatGPT 5 was going to be AGI, which didn't really make a lot of sense unless OpenAI had some hidden research lab that on all this new information was going to come out. There's nothing in the current research that says AGI is, you could say, a few years out here today. Like we just started to see that it can engage in basically fluid learning or reasoning or conversations where it can learn on the fly in an interactive way. We've just seen inklings of that where it can take what it knows and apply it to a new situation. In just Genie 3, which came out from Google, was probably the first decent world model. And what I'm saying, let's be
What's a world model?
Yeah, a world model is so you understand the physical world around you. So, like the first video models that came out from Sora, you'd see somebody like take their hand and put it through a table, or their leg would they're riding the horse and the leg goes to the horse. So these models didn't really have a good understanding of the physical world. But what we've seen from Genie 3 is that it seems to have a pretty good understanding of the physical world, but it just came out maybe 2 weeks ago. There was really nothing that indicated we were about to have AGI. And of course, a lot of the open AI researchers, they got recruited away to Meta for $100 million. It's understandable why they left. But if OpenAI really had AGI and they were about to declare it, I don't really think they would have left. So I think there were just these kind of false expectations about what it was going to be. So that was one source of it. The second source is that And I never really noticed this because I didn't use the 4.0 model a ton. I mostly used the 03 Pro for what I was doing. But I guess people really, and this is a whole other thing we could talk about, they felt like they got to know 4.0 was their friend and they just took 4.0 away. So it'd be like, oh, Stefan, Sabba can't do the podcast anymore. Joe's here and you're going to do it with him. Okay. I'm nothing against Joe. It's just like a different podcast, right? He's not going to be the same as Sabba. And people felt that was ripped away from them with no notice.
Do
You
you
know,
remember your LinkedIn post where you literally wrote exactly that? But you didn't write it for adults, you wrote it for kids, and you were like, what is it going to be when you take one of their friends away?
oh, yeah.
You
Oh, yeah. When it was
straight
about
up
the
wrote that.
phones, because I was like, oh, more schools are banning their phones. And I understand, like, there's a debate about that. I generally favor them keep the phones, but I understand it, right? I don't like wade into it too much, but I'm like, schools are going to have trouble just because these kids, that's their friend. And if you say you got to put your friend in a pocket at the beginning of the day and you get to see your friend at the end of the day, then that's going to cause its own problems that people aren't going to really be aware and adults aren't going to really get, even though it's probably happening to them too. They just don't want to admit it. It's why is Johnny kind of agitated and all that and be like, his friends in the pocket or whatever, right? And people make fun of him or whatever. Adults don't really get it. So it was just more that was going to cause its own problem. And it clearly caused its problems here. And there were some technical things. They have a thing where basically called a picker, where it was supposed to be like based on your prompt, it would either pick the reasoning model or the other model. And people wanted more control. And I understand that because sometimes you're like, oh, I really want to think hard about this. And other times you're like, I don't really have time. So even if I have to think hard, I'll just do the simple things. But I've been using it a lot. I've been using 5 a lot and I really like it. They claim it's a better writer. And in my mind, it's clearly a better writer. When I wanted help with writing, I'd usually go over to Claude and I don't do that anymore. I think it's there. I haven't used the just create apps on the fly, but I've used those and other tools. In Gemini, I just haven't used it here, but other people say it works really well. I think its memory is much stronger. When I'm writing, a lot of times I'll just have a conversation with ChatGPT to flesh out my ideas, and then I'll have it write a draft, and then I'll write on top of that. And the one weakness it had before was if I had too many ideas, it would seem to forget some of them. And now it's pretty fluid, and it puts them all together. And I also just think, I don't know exactly what the training data looks like, but I can get a lot more out of it before it has to take the time to go use like research tools. I find it pretty thorough. I was working on some debate arguments today and I just didn't feel like writing something out. I was like, oh, can you summarize this argument? And it did a really good job without having to search or anything like that. So I think on the whole, it's pretty good. Some people talk about how it's really great. I just think that there's a little bit of a false expectation. The one thing, a lot of people are using this, right? We haven't had the podcast in a while, and I don't think we talked about this, but it's 780 million people use it at least once a week. It's like 8% of the world population. And it's more than that because everybody can't really use it. Everyone in the world doesn't have internet. Some people are babies, right? So talk about the actual number of eligible users. Who knows? It might be like 20%. So a lot of people are using it. And a lot of people have a lot of really powerful intelligence, obviously, that they could bring to school, they could bring to work, they can do all these things. I think this thinking debate is getting hilarious, but we can talk about that some other time.
Well, we're going to talk about it next. But one of the things that I do want to really make sure that people, I think, understand is just how serious that element is that you brought up about people being friends with 4.0. Who had to? I don't know. I feel like these days everyone's off of X and I don't know how many people spend time on Reddit, but people were begging him to bring it back.
They're like addicted. Yeah.
Like absolutely begging. It was like you had arrested some hero and there were protests out like that was the image that kind of came to mind. And I want to actually read the tweet that he shared because it was interesting. They had another one like you were like, oh, I switch between this model and I test the ones out. But of the 800 million weekly users, only 10 million are on Plus. And this is, I feel like I am still observing everywhere. Everybody is just operating on the free version of ChatGPT, which we usually say if that's what you're doing, you really haven't experienced the tool to its full potential, even remotely. So of the 800 million weekly users, 10 million users are on Plus, which is a $20 a month plan, not the Pro, which is $200. Free users were using the reasoning models less than 1%. Now that they've merged it all, where OpenAI is making the choice, right? It's 7%. But the Plus users, okay, the people who are paying the extra money for extra access to the reasoning models were only using 7% of the time. And so there's just a lot of things that I think have been revealed about people's habits. But anyways, when it goes back to their reaction, because clearly OpenAI did not expect the kind of reaction to taking away for, they thought people would be happy. Hey, we're merging everything for you. You no longer have to make the choice yourself. But people were obviously really angry. They're angry because they said, it doesn't feel like my friend anymore. So Sam Altman recently tweeted, if you've been following the GPT-5 rollout, one thing you might be noticing is how much of an attachment some people have to specific AI models. It feels different and stronger than the kinds of attachment people had to previous technology. This is something we've been closely tracking for the past year, but it hasn't gotten much mainstream attention. People have used technology, including AI, in self-destructive ways. If a user is in a mentally fragile state and prone to delusion, we do not want the AI to reinforce that. Now, most users can keep a clear line between reality and fiction or roleplay, but a small percentage cannot. We value user freedom as a core principle, but we also feel responsible in how we introduce new technology with new risks. Encouraging delusion in a user that is having trouble telling the difference between reality and fiction is an extreme case. But what concerns me most is subtle. There's going to be lots of edge cases, and generally we plan to follow the principle of treat adult users like adults, which in some cases will include pushing back on users to ensure they're getting what they really want. A lot of people use ChatGPT like a therapist or a life coach, even if they wouldn't describe it that way. This can be really good. People are getting value. If people are getting good advice, leveling up toward their own goals, and their life satisfaction is increasing over the years, we will be proud of making something genuinely helpful. If, on the other hand, they have a relationship with ChatGPT where they feel better after talking to it, but they're nudged away from their longer-term well-being, however you define that, that's bad. It's also bad, for example, if a user wants to use ChatGPT and feels like they cannot. I can imagine a future where a lot of people trust ChatGPT's advice for their most important decisions. Although that could be great, it makes me uneasy. But I expect that it is coming to some degree, and soon billions of people may be talking to an AI in this way. So we as a society have to figure out how to make it a net positive. But I'll tell you what was even more interesting. Clearly, this experience with ChatGPT 4 and 5 reveal to the world just how important personalization and that friendliness is. And what's so interesting is when we've been leading Gemini workshops, like with all schools and businesses these days, because if you are not paying attention to Gemini's updates right now, they are just beyond superb. They are fantastic. In my opinion, the only AI tool an educator can access or a school can access for free at the highest quality level so that they can actually get exposure to what AI truly is. But one of the things Google did just 4 days ago, because when I introduce Gemini to people, I know everybody's a ChatGPT user. The first thing I tell them is, you're going to notice a difference in how it talks to you. ChatGPT is like your friend. Gemini is like that professional coworker with professional boundaries. And just 4 days ago, after all of this was revealed, Google then announced in the Gemini app, we're now going to be making it even more personal, proactive, and powerful. And so this is something I think so important to pay attention to. This is to me, like, I want to talk to you about this because you post about this. You have posted about this since day one on your blog. And that is, if we are not proactive about preparing young people, then they're going to be vulnerable to these companies and to all these different things. We have talked endlessly on this podcast about the power of agency, but also decision-making and teaching decision-making. And now here we are, where the biggest vulnerability has been exposed, and AI companies are now jumping over to take advantage of that vulnerability, that personalization of people being friends, instead of being like, okay, actually, no, sorry, I know you want 4.0 to be your friend, but that's probably not the best idea right now, so we're not going to do that. Instead, they totally gave in. And they gave it back to everybody with the caveat of start basically like breaking up with it and start that exit strategy.
They're putting some of that, I guess, that the connection into 5 now. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One of the first people to talk about this that I'm aware of, and is really even before Pi, right, which was designed to be your friend, right, the emotional intelligence. And that was Mustafa, Suleiman Bang, who went to Microsoft, right, got cannibalized. But that was the idea of to have a personal friend. And when I first saw them talking about that, I was like, oh, this is not good. And there's this intellectual in Harari, Noah,
Yeah.
and he's a good speaker. And he talks a lot about intimate. And this was all really before all this emotional attachment stuff came out. And he's like, oh, you're going to have an intimate relationships with the AI. And intimacy is the best form of persuasion. Right. And I think what's revealed is that these models, they can develop them in ways that have, I think in OpenAI, like Sam Altman was a bit surprised how connected are to the models. And even that one of the primary uses of Gen AI has been just interpersonal, like kind of dynamic and relationship, right? But if you talked earlier about what there's basically about 800 million users and only about 10 million of them are paid, if you have 790 million users that you have an emotional connection to, you probably don't really need to charge them for a subscription. You can probably find other ways to make money from them. You can direct them to a product and they'll be like, oh, just be like Sabba if you recommended something. You're like, oh, okay, that's different than just seeing an ad for it. So it's like your kind of friend is connecting you to a product, and you've always talks about it more in the context of politics. And that was one of my first Substack posts where I, when stuff on that was talking about Pi and Meet Your Friend and developing it, then I kind of a window over to Yuval and I integrated it together. I should run that one back out given the context of everything, but that you would be very influenced in terms of who you're going to vote for. So yeah, it's dynamic. It's tough. I think we talked about, I think when the last time we did the teens, right? Like 70% of teens basically have a bot friend. About a third of teens have a really close relationship with the bot friend. It's obviously spreading to adults. We see more people marrying the AIs. And I do think awareness is important because a lot of people are, and that's one thing I found with students this summer, they're just completely unaware. But also, like, how, even once you are aware, how do you really manage that? It's so subtle. And I did a lot of research on the AI and persuasion stuff and read a lot of the studies, and it's basically more persuasive in a digital form. If you're interacting online and someone's presenting themselves as a person, you're going to be more persuaded by that bot than an actual person. There are very subtle ways of engaging you that you may not really even be aware of. And of course, it's hard to just not use the tool. It's hard. That is, at least for me, like a massive productivity booster. People are going to use these things. You get addicted to them. I was thinking about addiction earlier, right? At least if people get addicted to like tobacco, but it's like you go and you get the cigarette, right? Or
Right.
whatever. And at least, obviously, it's hard to control an addiction, but you do have a way you can put the cigarette down, you can leave it outside or something like that. But it's hard to just put ChatGPT away and do your work. You
Yeah.
may have a job where you almost have to use it, regardless of this personal chatting, and that's going to build the relationship. So how these things get managed, it's probably just going to really transform who we are, because you're not going to have 800 million people start using ChatGPT. That's just ChatGPT. Now, I'm sure the ones who are using Gemini are going to be overlap. It's not like another 50 million people even using Gemini. But probably if you add, this is just a guess, but I bet with all the other AIs, there's another 200 million people, right? So a billion people probably use AI on a regular basis. So that's going to transform who we are as people.
Absolutely. And it's actually really funny you say once you understand that, you're just going to build other things, because there was just an article that came out in the New York Times, August 15th, and it says they're stuffed animals. They're also AI chatbots. And this is basically a new genre of screen-free toys that is coming to market. They're the cute little like stuffed animals that are going to talk to kids as young as 3 years old, probably even younger, depending on when you put it in their hands. And one of them, the New York Times article said, is called Grem, a fuzzy anime-style cube from a company called Curio, which describes itself as a magical workshop where toys come to life. But what's actually happening is more complicated. Inside that little like stuffed animal is a little chatbot powered by an AI tool designed to be a 24/7 conversational companion. And it's not just one, this thing called Grem. There's another one called Grok, another one called Gabo, Poe the AI bear. Even Mattel is now partnering. We talked about that before with OpenAI to bring Barbie and Ken into this AI toy market, basically. And so again, we go back to, I just like, what happens when a toy becomes a kid's thinking partner, a story partner, talking to them along the way? To your point, it is literally a new layer of intimacy from such a young, early age where you're so impressionable, where that connection is being built, obviously not with a person, but with a toy. And you just think about, I know we talked about this last time, like, what does that do to somebody's imagination, right? There's a group of people who are like, no, this is going to help imagination. It's going to help them be more creative. And then there's other people who are like, I don't know if I'm old school, but like, I fall into this category of, I don't no, that's how we want to build imagination. But again, I think these are some of the questions that are harder to answer. But when you think about how busy parents are, and you think about how much people have been left on screens. Oh, here's an iPad. You think about just going to a restaurant where a kid is on an iPad, or in an airport, we see it all the time. What happens now when you can just give your kid a stuffed animal? And almost does that even make you more reassured? Oh, yay, they're not on a screen. Now they're talking in this educational way to this little stuffed animal that they love. Like, what happens? What does it say? Who's going to track every single thing they say? Which is actually really interesting, because one of the things that's been really problematic that I've actually I think this just never clicked for me, was how many people, even though they talk about ethics and integrity, are actually only talking about academic ethics and academic integrity, which is in with the purpose of being able to preserve the essay. And I think because we are not widening our definition of integrity to how do you make decisions, we always go back to that C.S. Lewis, how do we help people make decisions when no one's watching? This was a big friction point for people with Gemini, which I found really strange, was like, oh no, we like school AI and Magic School because we can watch every word that kids are saying. Who's watching kids on the teddy bear when they're talking to the AI tool? It's definitely not the parent, it's definitely not the teacher. And then the schools go, we're just responsible for what happens during school time. And so that to me really goes back to, again, how do you see your role? How do you see who you are supposed to be for others in this moment? If your role is, well, just from 8 to 3, it's my job to keep them safe, then yes, integrity and ethics and all of these things are very much defined only in the realm of academics and school. But you are leaving kids so vulnerable to so many other aspects of life where these tools are embedded. So it's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what people are building.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. A few comments. The one is you have this quote you share frequently. It's like something, it's the magic. Once something, what's the quote?
Oh, the Arthur C. Clarke,
Yeah, yeah.
every technology is considered magic unless it existed when you were born.
So the one thought I had is that people's dolls talk to them. They're just going to think that's the norm. I remember first showed my very young niece how to make AI art, right? You could just make an image. And I thought, oh, I'll occupy her for like 15 minutes. I occupied her for 30 seconds. She was like, okay, what's the big deal? And I think, yeah, kids are going to grow up. It's not just their dolls. That's the easiest place to put it, right? But they say everything that moves is going to think. Like you're going to talk to your toaster. So that's just going to become kind of part of their lived reality. There are some upsides to it. I'll take the controversial tone because everyone thinks they're bad, which I probably agree with. But I'll start by saying one of the upsides is it's going to help you learn from a very young age. And when you get to kindergarten, it's going to know exactly what you know.
Yeah.
So it's a way to build like a knowledge graph. The other thing is that I've had this idea that I've had trouble articulating is that education's not going to be like you go to a place and you get educated, or even if you have downtime where you learn. Now kids have video game time, family dinner time, learning time, right? It's all going to be integrated. Those dolls are just going to be able to teach you things, and incidentally, something's going to come up and they'll help you understand some math thing where you don't really even know you're learning math. I think people forget that people learn things outside of school. And I don't just mean they go to the public library and they get a book. Like you're constantly learning. Babies learn, right? Before they even could possibly go to preschool. So people are learning outside of school, and this is just going to become another way, and it's going to become subtle, and it's just going to be like you're a parent, or like you said, you're visiting, your sister, right? And it's like, whoa, the opportunity presents itself to teach something to the kids in a different way, right? I think all those things are going to be there. I don't think that anybody's really prepared for this and what it means. I think we haven't talked about the Meta/Facebook documents that were released. They basically showed that it's acceptable to flirt with an 8-year-old. So, there could be some problematic elements of just kind of kids engaging a non-human. They engage with pets, but the pets don't engage that much, right? With non-human intelligence, but there's no regulations on these things. And there's not going to be in the US, at least for the next 4 years, right? There's some reputational limits, and no one's going to want their product to do anything terrible, obviously terrible, and no one's going to buy it. But there's not going to be any regulatory limits on these. And obviously, a definition of flirting can vary. It can be both innocuous and offensive depending on what the flirting is, right? We see that companies are willing to push the envelope quite far, not just with kids, but that means they're also pushing it with us. So maybe even farther. So yeah, it's complicated, but it's not. Somebody posted that this has come up before, right? We knew OpenAI was making agreements with the toy companies, and this was coming into toys. Now it's actually in a toy. It goes from the theoretical to the practical, and someone who I've gotten to know said this is a red line for me, and I agree with that. But I also look, the way I've looked at all this stuff is we can make any lines we want, but they're not going to stick. So then where do we go from there? Like, how do we help people manage it and build awareness of it? We're not going to stop it. It is inevitable. So, those are just some of my kind of broad thoughts on the issue. But yeah, it's a whole new world. And I think people are underestimating that, right? Because they're mostly, especially in education, you spent 2 years talking about whether it means you can't write a paper anymore. And if you can't write a paper, then you can't think. What about all the people who don't go to college? They don't think? Like a majority of the population does not go to college or graduate from college. So what? None of them are thinkers. This is just literally ridiculous. Or that we can't have other ways to think at school other than writing papers. So a large part of education got just pushed down to this kind of rat hole that's borderline irrelevant. But yeah, it's everywhere. I have some other thoughts, but yeah, what do you think?
No, I love that you keep going back to this theme because it's been something that honestly I think I've heard all summer long as people have been booking workshops and things like that. Every conversation seems to start with the kids aren't thinking anymore. They're
Right,
just
right.
not thinking anymore. Nobody's thinking anymore. And I hate to say this because it sounds so rude, to be honest. But one of the things I always observe in general is I think thinking was dead a long time ago. And I think we have just been living in this rote society where everything is so standardized and everything is done the same way and everything's a formula, everything's a grade, everything's something that over time people have just really become robots. I mean, we go back to this all the time that we're living in a world where I feel like machines are becoming more human, AI tools are becoming more human. We're giving them the experiences. Even when I hear about these AI companies talk about deep learning, when I hear them talk about how they're training their tools, they sound like elementary school teachers.
Right.
They sound like they're doing all the things it is we say we want to do, but that we don't. And when you look at how people have been treated over the past couple of years, I think one of the reasons people are really struggling to adapt is because they just have forgotten how to reconnect with themselves. They've forgotten what work it is they're supposed to be doing. And it's honestly, to me, one of the highlights of most of my workshops is introducing Spark. What problem do you want to solve? What
Right, right.
idea do you wish you could implement? And it takes a moment, but just watching people, and this is why I'm so grateful to Google Gemini, because prior to that, sure, I could put people in a free version of ChatGPT, but it wasn't sustainable for you after we left, right? Sure, you could play, but what Gemini have really done, what Google has really done is being like, hey, we're going to put the highest quality tool in your
Right.
hand so that now people like me and you can go in and do these workshops and experiences and actually share that with people. So I feel like that's a really big thing we've heard, but I want to talk a little bit about this because I think I was listening to an interview with Des Hassabis and he said the best thing. So we're going to build this up for you a little bit here because kids not thinking and that statement has just been the biggest friction point and statement of the summer. And we've just heard it from so many people. And my favorite question is define thinking. Like,
Right.
what do you mean by thinking, right? Is it recall? Is it logic? Is it creativity? Or is it strategic reasoning? Is it being able to think under pressure? What does thinking look like, feel like, and sound like to you? Because if we can't define thinking, you can't measure it, you can't protect it, and you definitely can't teach it. And this is where I think we see a really big part of the divide. But anyways, Des Hassabis was being interviewed. And if you don't know who he's the co-founder and CEO of Google DeepMind, literally one of the world's leading voices and minds behind AI. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work on AlphaFold, which, solved one of the hardest problems in biology, predicting 3D structure of proteins and stuff. But what was really interesting was he talks about how when he was younger, he was basically like a chess prodigy.
Right, right.
He was competing on England's junior team by the age of 4. And when he talks about what he learned about chess, it's not about, oh, how to make the best move or that. He said to me, it was strategic thinking under pressure and about how the habit of thinking, like real thinking, gets shaped when you're like 6, 8, 12, and you're asked to solve these problems. There's no script, there's no formula, there's no right answer. And he says, a lot of the way I think is influenced by chess and by dealing with pressure. And I was like, wow, what a profound, but also very tangible definition of what he means by thinking. And one of the things I've been doing, and I'm curious to hear how things are going for you in your classes, that I just started teaching in the Master's in Credential program at UC Irvine. And one of the things that I've been really intentional about is how am I breaking down your process of thinking. I
Yeah.
think also this assumption that kids automatically know how to think. And it has to really be broken down and designed with intentionality. So I'm teaching technology and media literacy. So the whole first day of the course was all about reflecting on your own relationship with technology. Now, I could have them write a paper and be like, go reflect on your relationship with technology and do a bit of a lecture and call that thinking and then complain when they turn in essays that are AI generated or whatever. Or I can be super intentional about taking you down that journey of self reflection and self awareness to help you unpack that thinking and that process and reflection. So we started with an individual piece, they did a partner piece, they did a group piece. And then one of the final pieces was like an empathy interview walk. And it was crazy to me how many kids thanked me for letting them go for a walk. And I think this really speaks as well, right? They're in desks all day long. They're in class from
Yeah.
9 p.m. to 7 p.m., sitting in a desk all day long. The number one comment I got was, thank you for letting us go on a walk. So again, I think back to when you ask people, where do you do your best thinking? In a shower, on a walk, on a this, how are
Yeah.
we merging and being intentional about this design? And so I just thought his definition, like I think everybody should sit down and be like, what is your definition of thinking on a piece of
Love that.
paper? And then everybody should go put their piece of post-it up on a wall, and you'll see probably how many things it is that people are saying in a different way. But again, when we think about AGI, I think it's really uncomfortable. I think you posted this, right? And I put it in my book as well. What happens in a world where machines act and think like humans? Because we're there. If you look at the thinking level of most people, we're there. If you want to take
Yeah.
your Nobel Peace Prize winners, okay. But you take an average person, I would say we're there.
No, I agree. Yeah, somebody said that when it was like a podcast about AGI and artificial general intelligence, and one of the metrics is like, well, it's clearly smarter than the average human. We've now started to find it as like, well, it has to be smarter than everyone. Okay, that's like really smart, right? Especially everyone combined. Not just smarter than some really smart person, but like smarter than everyone. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many other ways people think. First, like I said, there's only a percentage of the population that goes to college. They think you have dropouts, college dropouts. We can get kids to think in other ways. The one argument, someone say, oh, yeah, but I have a class with 600 kids because it's like a big lecture. Okay. It's harder to find a way to engage other than the paper, but that's a practical issue. That's how kids have to write a paper to think. So I think we need to, no pun intended, we need to get by that. It's like also like the writing detectors debate. It needs to go away. I saw someone post like a big series of articles about why writing detectors don't work. And I couldn't even read it just because I can't deal anymore with writing detectors. I can give you the 30 seconds, like why you shouldn't buy a writing detector, including like you could spend the money gambling and it'd be a better investment. But it's just, we have to move on from certain things. And it's not even that they're still talking about writing detectors. They're still talking about preserving this element of this old educational system that just doesn't matter anymore. So it's kind of locked in. We have to move on. There's so many other pressing issues. I did do some work with a lot of younger students this summer, and I thought a lot of their, maybe just give you 5 reactions. One, I spent a couple of weeks in China, mostly working with debaters. I was showing them some AI tools, and I showed them the China ones. So they'd all use like ChatGPT, right? So I mean, they're more like they'd use ChatGPT and not as many of the ones in China. Also, people say, oh, in China, all the kids are learning about AI. They didn't have any more knowledge than similarly situated students in the US that I worked with. They'd used like Manus, and I showed them Kimmy, which is actually really good. None of them understood like what AF was or how it worked. So I gave them a little explanation. So that second thing. The third thing though, I find is that kids in America, they don't really understand it. They use pretty much, I only had one student all summer when she was a junior high student who had never used any generative AI tool. That's the only one student. But I find the kids really know a little bit of the basics, how it works, more just question and answer. I actually taught them your Spark thing because I was like, look, we're not going to spend a lot of time on prompting, but you want to have a framework and approach. And they're like, oh, that's really useful. Then I gave them time to work and they're like, what they do? They're like, your Spark. And I got all this information, but I find that they wanted to engage. They used it. I taught them how to develop a business. Like I taught AI and entrepreneurship to them, and they all developed all these really cool businesses using AI just to help them develop their business plan. One girl talked to the AI for an hour about her business plan. Yeah, just sat there and I was like, oh, she's not doing anything. And I went and looked at a huge, long thing about her business plan. And then from that conversation, she had it write the business plan. They had all cool things. One built a whole fashion, make your own fashion kind of thing. They did that. Somebody optimized the bus routes around Tampa, Florida. Yeah, they did a lot of really cool stuff. We started, the sample one I did was we're going to need new homes. When we build new homes or parts of homes, we're going to have to accommodate humanoid robots. So that's what we started with, but they would jump ahead and then they were using the image things to generate the homes. So I find that the kids engage is much easier than trying to talk to them for more than a few minutes because kids just fade out. The other thing I noticed that we just did some presentations for a high school course I did, and they were all like different types of learning apps, most of them built. They said, well, kids, they don't like to listen to teachers talk. Because of that, we're going to have the app do this and engage the students. It really hit me that's so much different than a conversation with adults. Adults say kids don't want to pay attention to teachers anymore. So we're going to strap them in the desk and like physically point their head at the wall. And then we're going to come in the teacher's lounge and complain they don't want to listen to us talk. They don't think, okay, find another way to engage them. Their whole thing is, look, we have short attention spans and we don't want to listen to teachers. So let's come up with some other ways that we're going to learn. And that kind of hit me a bit. So, those are some of my student interactions. But I will say the awareness is low. One girl was using like character AI, and I was like, okay, you can use it. Whatever you sign up for at the school, you could use. You couldn't tell the kids to. When you're instructing them, you can't be, hey, little kids, go sign up for character AI, but there's no block on it or anything. And I was like, hey, these things can become like they can say inappropriate things. There's this person who got into a relationship and took their own life. And you might check with your parents, talk to your parents about this. They're like, oh, my mom knows I use it. It's fine. She doesn't care. And now maybe your mom doesn't know much about it or whatever. So I would say awareness is not super high. I only had one student all summer whose parents tried to regulate their generative AI use, but they let them use Copilot, which I'm not saying that was a bad decision, but out of maybe 50 or 60 students I've taught in high school and middle school, and I had previously taught some elementary school students in the spring, they were all regular users of generative AI tools. And no, obviously their parents, like they had accounts. Some of them had like Copilot accounts that their parents obviously set up. And there were like 10. The schools, obviously for legal reasons, are really strict. But when you just go outside those walls, kids are pretty much just doing anything they want.
And I think that's hopefully the takeaway that between now as we've started school, we're thinking about the beginning of the year. This is really the time to lean in with your teams to really go back to those questions, right? What kind of a teammate, what kind of a partner, collaborator, whatever you want to call it. This is literally a new species that has now entered the planet and has infiltrated every area of our lives. What kind of relationship do we want people to have with this species, right? What kind of work do we value? What kind of character traits and qualities not only do we value, but do we hope to see instill in young people and adults as we think about people going into the world, interacting more and more with this, and also having to make really important decisions? And then what systems are we going to put in place to support it? We're excited to bring this back. We've been a little busy traveling and whatnot, but hopefully we get back to doing this on a regular weekly basis. As always, if you have any questions, we would love to host a workshop if it's something you're interested in. Yeah, how do we make this transition? How do we move away from this culture of control and compliance and more towards really empowering students to make good, thoughtful, ethical decisions, even as C.S. Lewis says, when no one is watching? So definitely reach out if you have any questions, you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, or if you'd like to bring a workshop to your organization. Until then, we will see everyone next week.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.